I'm guessing you want to do a lot of things. You want to pay off your debt, build an emergency fund, save up for a house, invest for the future, all the things. So where does paying off debt fall on this list of all your financial goals? That's exactly what I want to talk about in this video. Over the last decade, almost every type of debt has risen significantly. Credit cards up 18%, car loans up 81%, student loans up 113%. At the same time, investing and saving for your future hasn't gotten any less important. So the question is, how do you balance that with getting out of debt? I spent the last 6 years trying to figure this out myself while I've been paying off the $100,000 of student loans that I racked up in college, which, by the way, I just finished paying off this year. So check out this video right here if you want to hear more about my debt-free journey. So debt-free within 6 years, not bad. But looking back, I can see that if I had just known how to prioritize better, I could have gotten out of debt even faster. Because I was always trying to pursue multiple financial goals at once, and I didn't know what to focus on at what time. So I definitely dragged out my debt for longer than I needed to, which also means I paid a lot more interest than I needed to, like a lot more. In the beginning of my debt-free journey, I was overly fixated on investing and having money in the bank versus paying off debt. So I definitely would not recommend the same for you. I want you to learn from my mistakes. One time, instead of putting it towards my student loans, I sat on $10,000 in my savings account for a whole year, thinking that I might need it someday. And this is over and above my emergency fund and all these other things. So after 1 year of doing absolutely nothing, I came to my senses and finally decided to take that $10,000, stop hoarding it, and just make a one-time payment towards my student loans. And this makes a huge difference. On a $30,000 student loan at 5% interest, making a one-time payment of $10,000 speeds up your payoff date by 4 years. It also saves you $4,889 in interest. Sure, you might feel a little naked depleting your savings, but sometimes you have to take one step back to move 2 steps forward. So all I can say is I'm glad I decided to stop hoarding my cash and finally just put my foot down and said, I'm gonna put everything towards debt instead. Because now, today, I'm sitting here talking to you completely debt-free, and it feels amazing. Honestly, I think people these days are a little too comfortable with being in debt. I was guilty of this myself. Being in debt is the status quo, but guys, don't be comfortable with the status quo. Just because everybody else is carrying some form of debt doesn't mean you should take your sweet time paying off your debt as well. In general, if you have debt, you just want to prioritize paying it off ASAP. The longer you take to pay it off, the more interest you're gonna pay, period. It's just math. However, of course, like so many things in personal finance, the answer isn't always 100% clear cut, because the debt versus investing question also depends on other factors, like what's the interest rate on your debt or what kind of debt you have. It also depends on whether or not you have an emergency fund, and also depends on how experienced of an investor you are. So if you're debating whether to invest versus pay off debt, here are the 6 things to prioritize in order. First, I would save up a small emergency fund. Most of the time, emergency expenses end up going on a credit card, and you really don't want that. So first and foremost, before you start making extra payments towards debt and being very aggressive with that, you need to first set aside a little something for emergencies. According to AAA, the average auto repair bill is $500 to $600. Also, the average emergency room visit costs $1,389, according to USA Today, which is why I like $1,000 as a starting point for your starter emergency fund, because it will cover most small emergencies that come up. It certainly doesn't make you bulletproof, but it's a good enough cash cushion to start with, and it'll actually put you ahead of the 78% of US workers who live paycheck to paycheck. Once you have at least $1,000 in your starter emergency fund, next I would pay off your credit cards. Credit card interest rates are high, like 15 to 25%. So the interest is double, triple, quadruple what you would make investing. So don't even think about investing until you have no credit card debt. If you have any extra money sitting in savings accounts other than your $1,000 mini starter emergency fund, I would use it to pay off your credit cards ASAP. It makes no sense to sit on cash that's earning basically 0% and carrying credit card debt that's costing you 15 to 25%. That makes absolutely no sense. Also, whatever you do, don't just make the minimum payments on your credit cards because you will get your eyes gouged out with interest. And even if you do a balance transfer to a card that offers 0% APR, you should still pay it off ASAP because 0% introductory rates don't last forever, and that credit card debt isn't going anywhere. So rather than moving your debt around from one place to another, just pay it off. So if you have credit cards, then the answer to this investing versus debt dilemma is easy. Don't invest, pay off the debt instead. So if I ever racked up some credit card debt during my debt-free journey, which was primarily about my student loans, I would basically halt everything else and just get that credit card balance back down to zero. And eventually I got to a point where I no longer carried credit card balances and built better habits about paying it off every month instead. But bottom line is, credit card debt is like a code red emergency, and that is really what you should be focusing on first before trying to invest and do any kind of other things. But what about other kinds of debt, like student loans, car loans, mortgages? Interest rates on these kinds of debt usually aren't anywhere near as high as credit cards. So here's what I would do. I would continue making minimum payments on that debt. And instead, here's what I'd like you to do next instead. The third step is to max out your 401k employer match. If your job doesn't do 401k match or you're self-employed, just skip this step, move on to number 4. But these days, many companies offer to match 401k contributions for a portion of your salary. So if your company matches you up to 5% of your salary for your 401k contributions, I would contribute 5%. This is kind of a no-brainer because 401k match is free money. Even though you could throw all of your monthly cash flow towards paying off the rest of your debt, I really think it's worth taking a little more time to pay off that debt just so you can maximize 401k employer match and get that free money. Even though it will cost you a little bit more interest on your debt over time, because instead of putting that money into your 401k, you could be paying that towards debt instead. But because 401k match is so awesome, you will more than make up for that with all of the free pre-tax money you'll accumulate in your 401k. Back when I first got out of college and started my first job, even though I had a ton of student loans to pay off and money was pretty tight every month, I had always maxed out my 401k employer match. And I'm really glad I did because my 401k grew a lot bigger than it otherwise would have if I hadn't taken advantage of employer match and just prioritized paying off debt instead. And that really is what gave me my jump start investing. And now that I'm debt free, I still have a nice size nest egg, which really all started from that 401k employer match money. Now, priority number 4. After you've done all the previous 3, you have a small emergency fund, no credit card debt, and if you have employer match in your 401k, you're maxing that out. Next up, I would start contributing no more than $100 a month into a Roth IRA. And other options besides the Roth IRA are traditional IRAs, HSAs, and if you're self-employed, SEP IRAs or solo 401ks. But the point is, make sure you're investing a little bit of money into a tax-advantaged account of some sort. Now, if you could use a detailed guide on which tax-advantaged investment account is best for you, as well as tips on where to open each type of account, check out my ultimate guide to investment accounts. It's a free PDF download. It's really thorough, so I put the link down below. Now, the reason why I think you should put no more than $100 a month into an investment account instead of making extra payments towards your remaining debt is because I think it makes sense numbers-wise. Let's say you take that $100 a month and you invest it into index funds. Then you can expect to make around a 7 to 10% annual return, which is probably more than the interest rate than you're paying on your student loans, car loans, and mortgage, which typically charge around 5% or even less. So if you net out everything, then you'll probably make a little more on your investments than you are paying in interest on your student loans, car loans, and mortgage, which is why I think it makes a little more sense to hold off a little bit on debt payoff at this point and to get started with some of your investing instead. Not only this, but it's important to start learning how to invest your money, and it's important to start building good investing habits early on. And that's exactly what you'll be doing once you're doing a $100 a month into your investment account. Because think about it, if all you focus on is just getting out of debt and nothing else, when you finally do become debt-free, you're gonna be totally clueless and intimidated about investing because you haven't had any practice at all. So the sooner you start dipping your toes into investing, I think the better, even if it's just with $100 a month. Speaking from personal experience, Now that I'm debt free, I can definitely confidently say that I can really just hit the ground running with investing now because I've been building my skills and practicing and getting used to market volatility and just creating good investor habits all the way since the beginning, instead of starting from scratch. Priority number 5 on the list is I would now get really super aggressive about paying off the rest of your debt. Make it a top priority to pay off your student loans, car loans, any tax debt, personal loans, everything except your mortgage. So whatever it may be, pay it off. And at this point, you should be just doing the bare minimum for saving and investing, just like we talked about in the previous 4 steps. And you're making as many payments as you can towards this other debt. And as you're working on this step, I would choose just one piece of debt to focus on at a time. And I would also recommend starting with the smallest piece of debt first. Why? Because starting with the smallest debt means you'll be able to pay it off faster and just get that quick win under your belt. Like I said before, so many people are so used to just carrying debt because that is the status quo. And I think a lot of these people have basically just lost all hope and motivation that they'll ever get out of debt. That's a really dangerous place to be. You do not want to get complacent with being in debt. It's not good. So that's why it's really important to achieve a quick win in your debt payoff journey as soon as possible, because then you'll see the light at the end of the tunnel and feel really motivated to just keep going. And because of how human behavior works, we are much more motivated when we see one full loan balance go to 0, however small that loan balance was to start with, than it is to see barely visible progress on multiple loans. So I recommend, as you're paying off all the rest of your debt, start with one piece of debt at a time and pick the smallest one first. Then once you're debt free, as priority number 6, which is last on the list, now you can save up for other things such as a bigger emergency fund, as well as more investing for your future. Because once you're debt free and you don't have monthly payments anymore, you are going to have so much free cash flow to start building up your assets. So you can use this money to save up a emergency fund of 3 to 6 months, which will really make you bulletproof. And you can also invest more money in your retirement accounts, as well as even getting into taxable brokerage accounts. Again, check out my ultimate guide to investment accounts to learn more about all the different types of investment accounts that you have at your disposal. But basically, once you're debt free, you have so many options and you will be able to build wealth so much faster. But I really do think this is the priority of steps that you should follow when you are wondering whether to invest versus pay off debt. As for mortgages, if you do have one, I would just get on a faster repayment schedule. So if you have a 10-year mortgage, try to pay it off in 8 years or something like that, just to get your house paid off sooner. But at this point, since mortgages are offset by the value of your home, I think that sort of debt can be a low priority compared to investing for retirement. So to recap, first, you want to save up a small starter emergency fund so that you don't end up back into debt having to put emergencies on a credit card. Priority number 2 is to pay off your credit cards. Once you have that starter emergency fund, you really want to get rid of this kind of toxic, high-interest credit card debt fast. And don't even think about investing until you do. Then once you've done that, step 3 is to max out your 401k employer match so you can get started investing with some free money. And if you don't have 401k employer match or you're self-employed, what you can do instead is to invest no more than $100 a month into a Roth IRA or some other tax-advantaged account. That way you can start building some good habits and getting over the learning curve of investing so that you can really hit the ground running once you're debt free. Then step 5 is to start focusing really aggressively on paying off all remaining debts minus your mortgage and just getting out of debt. Then finally, once you are debt free, only then and only then would I start pursuing all of your other investing goals, such as maxing out your Roth IRA and investing in other types of accounts. So that is really, I think, the order of how you should pursue things. The bottom line is make paying off debt a number 1 priority and then do the bare minimum on everything else until you are debt free. Investing can wait. Saving for a house can wait. Like seriously, everything can wait. Once you're debt free, you'll be able to catch up on all of your other financial goals and really more than make up for all that lost time. So instead of getting all anxious about FOMO and like worrying about falling behind, I would really just focus on one goal at a time instead of trying to do 5 different financial goals at once. Because if you do that, it's just gonna take you decades to accomplish any one financial goal if you're doing a million things at once. And that'll end up costing you thousands of dollars more in interest along the way. It is much more effective to go step by step, focus on one big financial priority at a time, and move on to the next thing only after you've crossed off the previous priority item. Doing it this way will get you to your debt-free date a lot faster. And trust me, I have lived it. And seriously, let me tell you, being 100% debt-free is an amazing feeling. I think everyone should try to get there as soon as humanly possible and not drag it on for longer than you need to. If you're sitting on some extra money somewhere, do yourself a favor, take a deep breath and use some of it, if not all of it, to just speed up your debt-free journey. It's gonna make a big difference. Investing and having money is important for sure, but the thing about carrying debt is that it makes you dependent on other people. It has this really heavy energy about it. Debt means you might have to take a job that you're not passionate about or put up with a boss you don't like because you need to pay for your debt. It's totally disempowering. So I definitely think the emotional and psychological benefits of paying off debt far outweighs any benefits of having money set aside somewhere. If you had to choose between the two, I would definitely go for just having the emotional and psychological freedom and lightness of just not having debt. If you set your mind to it and you follow the steps I've outlined in this video, there will come a day when you'll be 100% free of debt, and imagine having no more monthly payments to make and being able to direct all of your hard-earned money towards whatever you want instead of paying everybody else and their mother interest. So what kind of financial goals would you want to set then? Life after debt is a totally different ballgame. And now that I'm debt-free, I'm also having a blast thinking about what financial goals I want to pursue next in my life. So if you want to know what comes next once you become debt-free, make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell because next week, that is exactly what I'll be talking about. We're going to talk all about what you should focus on next once you finish paying off debt. That way, you're not completely clueless and you actually have something to look forward to when you finally get there. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week, same time, same place. Bye.